Hello, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Hey, need a quick loan? Dial 1-800. More on this. Stacy.
Okay, boomer, you are a boomer and you sound like a boomer. Always loans, 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 debt, debt, debt. Well, I want to start this episode with this theme of okay, boomer, which has gone viral, of course, and that's the millennials versus the boomers. The millennials basically rising up, okay? They're the biggest voting bloc in town, and they're asserting their power. So first, to put the context of what's going on in America, this okay boomer thing, I want to look at this chart. And this is only from 1791 to 2010, and it shows the U.S. national debt and the U.S. annual GDP. So as you see, from when we started our national debt in 1791, all the way to just after World War II. We had almost no debt, GDP stayed flat, and now, at least nominally, our nominal GDP is going up rapidly, but it's almost entirely with debt. And as we know from covering Jerome Powell last week, that is starting to, we're having to create $3 of debt just for $1 of GDP, so those are going to cross at one point. But this is important to understand that the boomers, and Donald Trump is the first of the boomers, the first wave of them born in 1946. This is the world they know, where everything goes up. It's always getting better. Everything does get better numbers-wise. Even if it's not just nominal, they always see number go up.
Let's look at another date, 1776, the beginning of what we now know as the United States of America. During that 240-year approximate period of time, interest rates have never been lower. That's why you have so much debt, because the cost of incurring debt is, for most people on Wall Street, is zero. They don't cost anything. It used to be, going back even 20 years, you used to have to pay 5 or 6% in interest to take on a bunch of debt. Now it's zero. Back in the UK recently, they had interest rates at a 300-year low, right? So there's no cost for debt. If you don't have to pay for it and you just get it for free, you get a bunch of money delivered to your office for free, and you can go buy Tiffany's with it, or you can go buy a big productive utility with it that's guaranteed income, or buy a huge corporation with it. Why not?
Well, there used to be a cost to debt, which is why we did not incur any debt, which is why we could not as a nation, and that's why the GDP stayed flat along with the flat levels of debt. Baby boomers were born in 1946. That's the first of them. The debt started to rise. GDP also started to rise nominally with it. 1971, of course, when the first of them were, 22, 23, we went off the gold standard because the cost of debt was real. We had to send several tons of gold, $300,000 worth at the time, to France when they showed up with their naval ship in the New York harbor. So there was a cost to it. Then they got to unhinge it, and of course, it was a magic trick, right? But the boomers have a mentality that they are somehow endowed with amazing ability and entrepreneurship and wonderful talent and wealth creation. When we see the magic trick, they were nothing special. They were not unique. The only thing unique about them is they had no alleged cost to their debt. But now we have a new generation who wants a similar trick done for them entering the workforce. And there's no trick.
Right.
We're trying things like quantitative easing and negative interest rates, which had never been tried in 5,000 years, and that's not doing the trick yet.
Yeah, going back to 1971, Richard Nixon couldn't afford the war anymore because he had to pay in gold for the money he was borrowing. So he cut the U.S. off from the gold standard. Then you entered a world of purely fiat money. So all fiat money refers to other fiat money. It's infinite regress, right? All the yen, the euro, the dollar, they all refer to each other, and they're all going deeper and deeper into debt. So there's no basic there. There's no way to measure the debt against something that would be considered money. Remember, J.P. Morgan said, only gold is money, everything else is credit or debt. Okay, so without that, there's no way to measure the debt. And there's no, at the moment, my view is that this is leading to neo-feudalism, where you have just a few private equity firms owning 98% of all the assets, and everyone else is living as serfs on that. We're heading back to the Dark Ages, in my view.
So we're going to look at a few other stories to suggest, yes, there is the top 0.1% that you talk about, but within that structure is allowed because the boomers got in first on this Ponzi scheme. We have a global fiat Ponzi scheme, and the boomers were lucky enough to be right there when it started. So we're going to show you how they benefited most versus Generation X, my generation, which came after them, and now millennials are doing even worse. Z, forget them, right? Fraction of U.S. wealth owned by boomers and Generation Xers when the average member of each was aged 35. Boomers in 1989, they owned 21% of U.S. wealth. Generation X in 2008, when they turned 35, 8%. So dropped by over 50%. The average millennial turns 35 in 2023. Right now, they own just 3%. So it's dropping by 50% because the early members of that Ponzi scheme have to be fed, and there's less and less wealth to share with the bottom.
In the old days, when the top 1/10 of 1% took all the power and money, they would put everyone else into ghettos, or they would put them on to serfs or indentured servants or sharecroppers, et cetera. Here in the modern age, in 21st century, this is engineered using interest rates. So the millennials or the Gen X people, they cannot borrow money at 0%. They have to borrow money at, on a credit card, it's 15, 16, 17%, or they go to a payday loan, which is at annualized rates of return in 2,000, 3,000%, right? So that's the ghetto of the 21st century, is your borrowing costs that are high. So you live in a what I call interest rate apartheid. You live in a Bantustan of high interest rates, and you're never ever going to get out of that because the policy is interest rate apartheid. That's the policy. It's not economics.
And how does that happen? How does your credit rating happen? How are you rated, your social credit score, essentially? Well, it's by how much debt you have compared to your income. So the boomers, they were born right after World War II. We had no debt here. Our economy, the GI Bill, financed everybody's free education. Everybody was educated. The suburbs were built. These are basically government plans helping to build and facilitate these structures. Then now the Generation X, why they don't have a home by 35 years old is because they have all that student debt. So they have a lower credit rating. They're born subprime. They're born with debt. So therefore their credit rating is lower, meaning their interest rate is higher than what a boomer can, because a boomer got in first on this pyramid scheme of a fiat economy, and they have more equity than anybody below them. So it's just natural. Anybody first in a pyramid scheme has more equity. They're getting a bigger income stream from those coming in.
The response from the left is to go after the billionaires and say, we need to raise your taxes. And the billionaires, because they have all the power, will resist that, and they're not going to see that happen. But what they should do, I'll give them the recipe now to increase their power, is that they need to get a seat at the Federal Reserve Bank, they need to get majority on the Fed, and they need to raise rates. That's how you restore equilibrium. That's how they will get a piece of the pie. When Donald Trump says the Fed needs to lower rates or go negative, that should be the tip-off. That's the vulnerability. That's his weak spot. Okay, to put it in terms that the millennials will understand, pretend this is Star Wars, and the Death Star has a weak spot, and Luke has to fly in and hit that exact weak spot to blow up the Death Star. Okay, so the weak spot for the Death Star, that is the Federal Reserve controlled global economy, is interest rates. If you can control seats on the Federal Reserve Board or the Federal Open Market Committee and get rates to go up, then Trump collapses, the Republicans collapse, the concentration of wealth collapses, the wealth and income gap is restored to normalcy, and you have agency once again in this economy. That's the only spot. You can try to hit there and hit there and hit there, and you can look great doing it, but that is going to be ineffectual.
Well, here's another way, and the Wall Street Journal, in fact, is suggesting this, because
I'm curious.
Because, the top 1% own all the stock market, and that helps their wealth on paper look enormous. The average boomer, why they're ahead in that discrepancy in the wealth, is almost entirely down to homes, house prices. They were first in on this house price boom. Remember when they were first entering the market, they had to put 20% down. Now it's down to 1% or 2% that you have to put down in order to leverage up and keep those high prices on homes so that the ordinary boomer feels wealthy. Well, the Wall Street Journal points out boomers are about to flood the market with homes. Will anyone want to buy them? The headline of their actual article reads, "Okay, boomer, who is going to buy your 21 million homes?" Baby boomers are getting ready to sell 1/4 of America's homes over the next 2 decades. The problem is many of these properties are in places that millennials don't want to live. So, this is power. Like they're forced sellers. You're the unwilling buyer. Just don't buy for them. And that Ponzi scheme collapses. This is the thing about pyramid schemes, about Ponzi schemes. Let's just call it a pyramid scheme in this case. It's just almost accidental. It became accidental, and now it's intentional to try to keep it afloat.
Well, having a career on Wall Street, my immediate response would be to acquire all these distressed properties by the millions and package them as an offering that would, and get Congress to pass a law that would enable this to be sold off as a tax write-off, right? So you're converting losses into tax write-offs, and you're going to give those top 0.1% away to shelter income. Remember, during the Resolution Trust Corporation, when the S&L market blew up, the Wall Street got Congress to package all the bad banks and sell them to people like Ron Perlman and Carl Icahn and others as tax write-offs. And they didn't pay taxes for 20, 30 years, and they made another few $1 billion. So I'm not sure. Immediately I figured out a way to make money on that. The way that would kill it is if interest rates went higher and you raise my cost of borrowing. Now suddenly my net worth has to be marked down because it's all based on having access to capital at zero cost.
That's the problem. Is house prices and bubbles can only sustain itself if people can keep on rolling over the debt. We've been rolling over the debt since the interest rates have been going lower and lower and lower since the boomers were 35.
Right.
Since then, interest rates have been going down. Now that we get to them retiring from this pyramid scheme, and interest rates are already near zero. So the problem is how can we get the pyramid to continue for another 20 years while they dump these 21 million homes?
Pay less in wages? And open up global labor markets?
No, but you need to be able to expand the debt in order to keep their prices that they have in their head for their retirement.
Of course you can expand the debt.
Well, okay, let's see. I think,
when has it not been ever extended? It's like 23, 24
Well, that's because
trillion.
you're a boomer. The audience right now, the audience is going to say, okay, boomer, that's what you've relied on for your entire life.
And I'm giving you the recipe to fight back, millennial Gen Z, but you're not going to do it because you want to be like me. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with Ross Ashcroft. He's the director of the Four Horsemen 2012. He's also got his own show out there, Renegade Inc., and it's a must see viewing. If you're interested in this show, you'll love that show. Ross, welcome back.
Hey, Max, good to see you.
Ross, we're heading into 2020. We're leaving 2019. The year is ending with U.S. stock markets at all-time highs, but political uprisings across the world. Are these two connected? What are some of your thoughts heading into 2020?
Everything's fine, Max. Go out, buy, make those investment decisions. It's never been better. And of course, that's exactly the moment when you don't, and you don't go like everybody else mad and buy into this mania. You're sort of at your shoeshine boy moment where, the shoeshine boy is talking about which stock he's bought and whether he's long Uber or not. So I think that we're in the most precarious position. And I think this euphoria is a mask. And I think people should be very, very careful over 2020 because for me, I think it's going to be the year of reckoning.
The year of reckoning. Oh boy, That sounds dramatic. So let's break it down. Do you have any specific points that we should be looking ahead to for 2020? Some predictions, some insights, Ross?
I think the first thing to say is that 2019, 2020 will be the years looked back on when people will realize that mainstream media has lost all its trust. Specifically, organizations like the BBC, they were recently caught editing footage to sort of airbrush the people that they think that they should be presenting in a more positive way. The public aren't stupid. And social media, Twitter, the bloggers out there who are really watching really carefully are not being manipulated by these big media behemoths anymore.
All right, so 2020, we're going to see mainstream media finally get its comeuppance, even though they've worked doggedly to deplatform so many independent media sources out there. We've seen a lot of big names get deplatformed, no longer in the media landscape, but it doesn't seem that's going to save mainstream media because their fascist collusion with the racketeers on Wall Street and the kleptocrats in political centers is untenable by this millennial and this Generation Z who have come up with this new meme, new catchphrase called "Okay, boomer." Okay, so I'm a boomer, so I don't even know how I'm being slandered by these youngsters.
Look at what's happened. Look at the intergenerational strife that's gone on. And if you think about it, the BBC, average age of the BBC One viewer is about 58. Average age of BBC Two viewer in the UK is 66. The mainstream media have got a massive problem on their hands. And the new independent media, shows like yours, Renegade Inc., and others coming up, the reason our viewing figures are all going in the right direction is because we're actually reflecting what people are feeling in their lives. We're not telling people, which is what the MSM, the mainstream media, do all the time. They're very didactic. They tell you how to think and what you should be thinking, what you should be looking at, what you shouldn't. And that, when you've got multi-screens now in the world, people will go and seek out the veracity of each story and make their own mind up, and that can only be a good thing for democracy and societies as a whole. So I think peak mainstream media, but that sort of segues into something else, and it segues into the sort of prolonged Japanification of the West. So that's another prediction. I just think that this stagnation is just going to continue and grind on and on and on. I think it was Schiller or Goethe, one of the German writers, said, you know, man can survive anything but a succession of ordinary days. And that's basically what we're going to see over the next couple of decades, because as you can see now, this ongoing stimulus doesn't have an effect, and the real economy is laboring under massive amounts of private debt. So my second prediction is ongoing Japanification across the developed West.
Yeah, what about the bond vigilantes? Remember them? They used to sell the bond market off when the inflationary pressures were starting to rear their ugly head. And inflation's been outlawed effectively because the central banks have an infinite budget to buy all the bonds that they need to for eternity to keep interest rates low, to kill the bond vigilantes, to make it a Shangri-La, la-di-da economic environment where wages never go up, but stock prices never go down. And I don't see any reason why that can't continue in 2020, because the balance sheets of the central banks, they are at roughly, I haven't seen the numbers in the last few weeks, but let's call it $50 trillion. They could easily go to $200 trillion. Ross, why not?
Where does this logically end? That every central bank basically owns everything.
Right, okay, let me jump in for a second, Ross, because in my view, that's exactly the end game. It's called taking the world private. Wall Street, with the help of 0% interest rates, are taking all these companies private, all these big deals, all these big mergers. You know, I see Hewlett-Packard's not going to be hostile rated by Xerox, Tiffany being bought by in European luxury goods. It's all going private, Ross. That's where it ends, and the Dow could go to 70,000.
So what does it look like at the absolute end game? That
feudalism.
Everybody sits in the Federal Reserve and runs the world from there?
Feudalism, neo-feudalism.
Do you think that the public, having been smashed to pieces for decades, certainly austerity in this country, do you think the public are going to take that?
Yes, because the public has been proven time and time again to be easily pawned off with cheap programming and cheap calories with cheap food, and they have no... Okay, I mean, it seems as though the public is stupid. But I do see some bright spots with like Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey combining forces to come up with new technology and new emphasis on deglobalization, de-dollarization. They're trying to recreate the world by making everyone individually sovereign, using technology and solar panels and things like that. But if that doesn't take off, I just see a return to the Dark Ages. And so everything from the Enlightenment going forward would be just a bad dream. We're back to feudalism and serfs and kings. I mean, the public, what defense does the public have? How are they going to fight that?
Well, first things first, Elon needs to sort those windows out on that truck, right? So he's busy. And Jack Dorsey needs to sort all that shadow banning out on Twitter. So they're the first two things that need addressing. Insofar as total inequality, it's really interesting what's happening in the UK when you talk about feudalism, because I don't know if you've heard about it, but there's a guy called Prince Andrew. And that's my other prediction for 2020. I think he's going to start sweating again. And when systems start to come apart, people make really big errors. He's made one recently, and really it's made what is ordinarily a very, very proud and pro-monarchy country really question the structures that we live under. And I don't see, as economic conditions deteriorate and get worse, I don't see that questioning and that dissent going away, however much the mainstream media try and airbrush it. So I'm probably a little more hopeful, and I think that you need this level of creative destruction and economic crumbling, if you like, before the green shoots can come through. But I do hear you about the monopoly effect that the central bankers have, certainly with the money supply, and also the terrible, terrible political decisions that we are all enduring at the moment. But I don't think the public will take it forever.
What about a global debt jubilee? This would be an interesting situation. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I'm in. We've just been interviewing Andrew Ross, and he wrote Creditocracy. Now, the embers of Occupy are still burning. They're still glowing. And when you realize that so many students in America are so indebted that actually they can't enter into the norms of the economy, norms of society, you realize that you're going to have to strike all that debt. So for a global debt jubilee, yes, we need to get rid of all the private debt, but where to start, and Bernie Sanders is very good on this, where to start is a student debt jubilee. Because if you want a future, and if you don't want Japanification of America, which you're getting at the moment, and you know what that leads to? Intergenerational mortgages, which is more debt and more private debt and bigger juiced asset prices and more bonuses for people like Jamie Dimon. If you don't want that, what you're going to have to do is get rid of all that debt. And I tell you, the way to do it is firstly, cancel it. And secondly, if you're going to if corporates are going to be using students that are coming out of those universities, increase all the taxes on those guys and use that tax dollar to pay for students.
In the 60s, students used to burn their draft cards. Why shouldn't students in the 21st century burn their student debt obligations?
Here's the key point on this, right? You can't do it as a student watching this individually. You have to organize. 1 million students every year at default and cannot make those payments. That's a huge amount. But no one really knows about it because people are getting ashamed and they don't want to talk about their financial woes. So what they have to do is everyone has to organize, and collectively you'll get that debt struck off.
Right. Well, it's hard. I mean, during the Vietnam War protestations, if you saw your friends coming back in body bags, it was easier to get a social movement going. But here, it's like a victimless crime because you don't really see the carnage. We're told it's a victimless crime. And there's always going to be some students that are going to be like, well, I'm going to play the game theory here, and I'm going to be the only one not to burn my debt, and I'm going to get a job at JP Morgan, and I'm going to be running that company one day. Right? So how do you get folks to act in their own self-interest as a group?
Firstly, you explain to them that this isn't victimless. There's the downside to all of this is ultimately a society's ruin. But on the way, all the mental health issues that go with it, there are suicide rates are going through the roof. There is a total shunning of entering into society because students feel so disenfranchised. the birth rate's going down. All those indicators, those socioeconomic indicators, are going in the wrong direction. So this isn't victimless. This is very well organized, and we know who the organizers are. So what you do is you explain that to people, and maybe some outliers want to go off to JP Morgan and fritter their life away looking at spreadsheets. But others who want to add value, start businesses, create the entrepreneurial class, really work in the real economy, do all the things that give meaning and purpose. You explain to them that actually they have a moral obligation not to pay this debt back. That's
right,
what you
it's
do.
a moral obligation not to pay the debt. Ross Ashcroft, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Pleasure, good to see you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this episode of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Ross Ashcroft of the Renegade Inc. and the filmmaker behind the global smash hit, The Four Horsemen. I'm in that film, by the way. Probably the best part. Anyway, if you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.